Hello everybody, welcome back to my channel. My name is Maureen O'Connor from Quilters Heaven in Northbrook, Illinois, and I am the Opinionated Quilter. Today's episode, number 89, is another terrific scrap quilt for you. But before we get to that, let's get to my opinion. I had a customer come in the store this past week, and she said she was at a friend's house who's also a quilter, and she was in her sewing room. And she asked, "Where's your iron?" And the woman responded, "I don't use an iron." "What? You don't use an iron?" I was astounded. In my opinion, your work will always be better if you use an iron and you use it properly. Why do you need an iron? You want your quilt top or whatever quilting project that you're working on to be flat. The only way to get it flat is with an iron. In addition to that, when you press your block units or your blocks, you find where your errors are or where things aren't good enough, don't meet your expectations. Good example, right behind me. When I pressed this quilt top, I found a little pleat right here. Now you probably can't see it on the camera, and it doesn't matter, you don't need to see it. All you need to know is that it's there. So I put a pin in it, which is why the pin is still there now. That says to me, you need to fix that error before you put the quilt on the long arm. Now it is pretty minute, and some people might not see it, but it's not good enough for me. In addition to little things like pleats, you see if these intersections meet properly. Are they good enough for you? Or do you need to rip and redo? Is this point cut off? No. But if it was, you would rip it and redo it. You find that when you press. If you skip that whole step, you can have seams that are open. You can have the pleats like I showed you, points cut off. You want to use your iron. Don't skip that step. Let's get to today's episode. So do you remember this bag? I showed it to you when my customer dropped off a bag and it was full of scraps. And I said to you, what should I do with it? Do you have any ideas? Well, I didn't find anything right away, and I kept thinking about it. What should I use? What should I do? And I did go through the bag and I put some juvenile fabric with juvenile stuff, but I came across a pile that had these colors in it. And I decided that's what I wanted to use. So it had a lot of green in it, and it did have some reddy, pinky, orangey accents in it. So I said, that's what I'm going to use. And then the next question is, what pattern are you going to do? Well, I wanted to come up with something. I've done enough of the chip of the off the old block. I've done several quilts over and over again. I wanted to do something different. And I've showed you these before. There's all kinds of resources. This is an old version of a block tool. They don't make it in this format anymore. They make it like this in a spiral bound book that you can flip through and look and say, do I want to do this block or not? Another version. And I came across this book. And it's actually from 2015. It's 1,000 blocks from Quilt Maker. So I started paging through this book. And I got to block number 790, and I will insert here a picture of this block so you can see it better. But it's essentially a split 16 patch, and it's by June Dudley, who is a editor-in-chief of Quilt Maker, and she called it Shortcut. So I decided to do that. Now, it is a split 9 patch, so you could argue that I've made plenty of them before because I've done similar in just plain half square triangles, and this, the split 9 patch before. And this one I've done in a 6-inch block, and it's made up of 3 white squares and 3 half square triangles, with half being white, half being the color print, and then 3 squares of color prints. You may remember this one. This is the same block, but 3-inch squares. And I stopped when it got this big because I wasn't having fun. And like I've said before, this is our hobby. We're supposed to have fun. So at some point I will finish this for an American Girl doll. Hasn't gotten done yet, but at some point it will. Maybe when there's a granddaughter in my life that might need an American Girl doll quilt, but that hasn't happened yet either. So anyway, this has the block is here, and it is, did I say that right? The block is here. So it has 3 white squares, 3 half square triangles, and 3 print squares, just like the 6-inch version. And behind me, which I showed you before, this is the same thing, except instead of individual squares and half square triangles on the white side, it is 1 large half square triangle to finish off the individual squares on the blue side. And this was done using Deb Tucker's shaded 9 patch. She also has a shaded 4 patch, but they all work the same way, and they work the same way as the block I decided to do. So now I've got the block, and I've got the green squares. And so now I need to pull from the scrap fabrics another color. I didn't want to do white. I've done too much white recently, as you've seen. So I decided to pick up on the orangies and pinkies, coralies in the greens. So I go through the scrap pile, I pick out what works, and to me, the success in your scrap quilt is your fabric choices. I'm not a fan of those scrap quilts that throw everything, including the kitchen sink, in it. I don't like the Christmas fabric with the baby fabric, with the very masculine looking fabric, and the Halloween fabric. I like things to have some sort of color theme or some sort of continuity thread in it. So I go through my fabric, and this one was in the scrap pile, and as you can see, it has a lot of pink in it. It still has the orange in it and the pale orange in it. So I decided to keep this one in. You may choose not to. I decided it wasn't going to bother me. It's a small enough piece. There's not going to be a ton in there. So I'm going to use it. This one, on the other hand, was in the scrap pile. And if you look at these big white ovals here, if a 2-inch square were cut from this, you would only see white. You wouldn't see the color in it. You wouldn't see this orangey, pinky kind of thing, reddy thing. So this one I chose not to use. So then I look at what I have, and I decide how many blocks do I want to make. This is an 8-inch block using 2-inch finished squares. So I decide the minimum size I want to make is 6 by 8. So that would come out to a 48 by 64 quilt, and I think that's a great size. But I look at what I've pulled from the scrap pile, and I can see pretty much right away I'm not going to have enough variety, and I'm not going to have enough fabric. So I go to the other scrap piles within the store to figure out what other pieces I've got to use. And one place I go to right away is the 2.5-inch strip pile. Why? Because they're 2-inch finished squares. So that would be a 2.5-inch cut square. I've also decided that I'm not going to use the method we talked about last week to make the half square triangles. To take two squares together, draw a diagonal line, sew on both sides of the line, cut in half, and get two squares. Why do I choose not to use that method? Because I want to use the 2.5-inch strip to get my half square triangle pieces as well. If I do the 2 square method, I need 3.5-inch squares, which means I need 2.5-inch pieces and 3.5-inch pieces. I wanted to just use the one strip. I will admit I much prefer the two squares, the bigger squares. I think you get better accurate pieces, but I still chose the other method. Now I want to show you how it worked out. We're going to move the camera to show you cutting from the strip. Here is a 2.5-inch strip I found in the pile that I decided I was going to use. And one thing I really like about this, using the full width of fabric 2.5-inch strip, is you can get one block from one full width of fabric, provided you don't have a super wide selvage, like the Ruby Star Society fabrics with the super wide selvage. You'll have to cut an extra piece from some other scrap. But I go ahead and start with some squares. Now in this block I need 12 2.5-inch squares, and I need 8 half square triangles. So the first thing I'm going to do is overcut the first one to make sure I get rid of the whole selvage. And I'm going to go ahead and cut. And this one I have to go back and cut the selvage off, and this will go into the dog bed stuffing pile. And now I'm going to go ahead and cut 3 across, because that'll give me 6. And because if I run out of it, I want to run out of a square, I want to get all my half square triangles in, I don't cut all my squares first. I cut half of them, which is 6. Now this is all personal preference. You can do any order you want. Now I'm going to take my easy angle ruler, and you may have another brand. This is the one I have. This is the one I like, by Sharon Hultgren. And I go ahead and lay this triangle with the 2.5-inch line on the bottom of the fabric. And the reason that you can get this half square triangle out of the 2.5-inch strip instead of needing the bigger strip is the tip is cut off, and that gets rid of that extra bit. So I'm going to cut, and I need 8 of these, and I've got it doubled down here, so I'm getting 2 in each cut. So now I'm going to do 2 more. And then I'm going to finish off, and hopefully I get 3 cuts here, because that would be 6 more. And that would give me my 12 I need. If I only get 5, I have to go to the scrap pile and find another one that will work. And boy, I just barely make it. That's what I like about this, that when it gets all the way across, you have virtually no waste. Look at that. I just love that. So that's one more block, and I had 32, so this would be 33, and then I keep counting up till I get to the 48 I decided to make. So now that we're cut, now we have to start putting them together. So now I have all my pieces cut, and I sew all my half square triangles together, one orange, one green. Then I start laying out the squares. I have tried to figure out the pressing on this for years, and I have finally figured it out. When you do this barn raising layout, which this is called barn raising, you need two different sets of pressing directions, because when you lay out your squares to get your seams to nest in opposite directions, you need quadrants. You have A pressing and B pressing, and this is right here in the center. This is where the pressing has to switch so that your pieces will line up. It makes such a difference when you're sewing them together to not have to say, oh, I've got to rip that, press that a different direction. Oh man, they're all going in the same direction. Well, I'm going to press them open. If you do two different sets of pressing directions, they will come together perfectly. Let me show you. Here are my 4 sample blocks that I made. I've told you several times over the last year that if you don't have pressing directions in your quilt pattern, make 4 blocks and make sure that the directions of your seams is how you like it, so that your seams will nest easily. So these 2 are pressed the same, and these 2 are pressed the same. This one here, now I have to, while it's in this, in columns, I put it together in rows. So I'm going to lay this out as a row. And I'm going to do the same with this one. And you can see they are the same. I have the top one pressed towards the green, opposite back to the side here, and then back here, so that all these line up. Then I have all of them pressed down towards the longer orange side. These 2 are pressed the same, and they are pressed opposite. Where this one is pressed this direction, this one is pressed to this direction. So it doesn't matter which way you go as long as they're opposite. So now this one, again, is opposite all the way down. And what else is different here? This one is pressed down, this one is pressed up. And that's the magic. That's how it's all going to work. Let's put them back. I'm going to fold this back. You can see these are pressed down, these are pressed up. They're going to meet. These are pressed this way. These are pressed this way. They're going to meet. And it goes the same all the way around. Down, up. Same with here. They all meet perfectly. Now, are they going to meet further out? Yes, they will. The piece that would go next to this one has to be all the same A quadrant. That's how that goes here, to make that angle line around the center square of orange. The green goes like this. So the piece is here. Down, up. They're going to meet. And just trust me on it, I've tested it. All the A pieces here will work for the whole A quadrant. And all the B pieces will work for the 2 B quadrants. No, that's not right. Nope. Okay, come on. This is, okay, there we go. There's the green again. Up, down. So that is the magic of pressing. It only took me, I don't know, 20 years to figure it out. But I'm sure glad I did, because this is going to come together fast once I get all the pieces cut. So I hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you have any comments, which method of cutting your half square triangles? Do you know anybody who doesn't use an iron? Let me know what you think. Drop them in the comments below. That's our episode today. Please like, share, and subscribe. And until next time, happy sewing.